I'm Theron Ramacharaka. Then again, you probably already know that. Look, if you hang on one moment, I'm going to get something off my bookshelf and I'm going to show it to you. And then I'm going to talk about what it refers to. This is a pretty important thing, so please hang on. I found it. All right, look at this. My challenge for you here in this video is to read backwards. This book is by, can you read that? Chogyam Trungpa. Chogyam Trungpa. Published by Shambhala Dragon Editions. The book is called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. All right. I'm not going to narrate this whole book to you, but it's quite a good book. I'll tell you what it's about, and I've already insinuated some of this in a much earlier video of my own making here. I've referred to it a couple of times, actually. Now I'm going to make a big point out of it. What does Chogyam Trungpa mean by spiritual materialism? Well, look, it's been a long time since I read that book, so there's no way I'm plagiarizing here, really. I'm barely even paraphrasing because I don't remember any of his exact terminology. So I'm just going to give you my idea of what I remember from it. What he means by spiritual materialism is getting yourself onto a spiritual path and taking your little false ego along with you on it, amounting to no spiritual growth whatsoever, or very little, or perhaps a bit of spiritual growth, a bit of spiritual development, and then a big backslide. Now, insofar as I'm just winging it here, I'm going to jump off to something else here for a moment, but it's related. I saw a video here lately on YouTube. I guess it was, I don't know what it was called. I don't know who did it, but it had to do with New Age thought, New Age stuff. And it was talking about, you know, the pitfalls of the so-called New Age religion. And it was a warning, you know, not to get caught up in it. Look, I'm not a New Ager. Perhaps you know that by now. I don't consider myself to be a New Ager. Like I have said, there is some good stuff in the New Age thought, New Age circle. But a lot of it is deceptive too. A lot of it is disinformation. Some of it is misinformation. Some of it is information. Some of it is actually good information. And weeding it all out is a bit of a problem. There are a lot of ideas about what the whole New Age thing is really all about. And I'm not going to get into all of that. My point for bringing it up is this video that I saw pointed out some things that are dangerous about New Age ideology. And I agreed with some of it and I disagreed with some of it. I mean, for one thing I disagreed with, that is a so-called New Age idea, right? That is a dangerous one, is the idea of karma. Well, it so happens that the point of view of the person who created this video that I don't remember the name of, but who was talking about this, okay? It was a kind of a fundamentalist Christian point of view. And this person said, insinuated or implied, okay, indicated that the idea of karma came along with the New Age movement, and that it is a dangerous and very deceptive concept, karma. Well, see, in my opinion, and in many other people's, probably for the last, I don't know, 5,000 years at least, the idea of karma didn't just pop up 100 years ago. As a matter of fact, no matter what has happened to it through history, the Bible, there is, as I recall, something about as ye sow, ye shall reap. Doesn't that kind of refer to what we commonly in New Age ideology call karma? Or simply cause and effect? It's not a new idea, folks. It's not part of the New Age ideology, this idea of karma. So, look, I completely disagreed with that statement in that video, and it made me wonder what else was going to be kind of just out of the blue in that video. But there were some good things. The one that's important here for this video that I'm recording right now was the suggestion that a lot of New Age thought talks about personal empowerment. And I have talked about the word power, especially associated with giving you the power of control over your own personal evolution. I have said things like that. I have always tried to link up the word power with the word will. And I have gone to lengths, I think, to describe and explain exactly what will is and what all will is rooted in, what it all really is. Okay? Universal will, or in Christian theology terms, God's will. All right. This video that I'm referring to here, this person who was talking against New Age religion, in my opinion, quite correctly pointed out that New Age ideology appeals quite a bit to the false ego when it talks about, personal empowerment. Like, you take charge of your own destiny. You take charge of your own personal evolution. You take charge. You move yourself to the fifth dimension. You ascend. This ascension talk. This change of, increase or in vibrations of, frequency of vibrations. It's all, personal empowerment and so forth. It's all designed to appeal to the ego. Now, that part, if anybody takes any of this talk, especially any of my talk, to appeal to your personal little false ego with the small e, anything along any of these lines boosts that in any way, then you're not on the road to personal evolvement in a healthy manner at all. That is true. And that is what this is about. Spiritual materialism involves, well, there are a lot of ways to arrive at it. There are as many ways as the human ego, not the true self, not the true I, not the true ego with the capital E, but the little e. The little ego, that is the false sense of identity, the personality, everything all wrapped up in physical plane life. You should know the distinction by now because I have talked about it kind of not quite ad nauseum, but at some length earlier in this playlist. Now it's time to come back to that and be a little bit more serious about it. And by serious, I mean emphatic. Because if you've been following through, actively engaging in the material that I've been posting here, and you have been bringing your little ego with you on this journey of personal unfoldment, then you've been doing something wrong. You've been doing nothing that I have taught you to do, or that I have laid out for you to do, or that I have suggested that you do. If you have been strutting around, feeling like, oh, I'm personally evolving. Oh, I have more terminology about personal evolvement now than I used to. Hey, I know some universal laws. I'm a little ahead of that other person. If any of that's going through your mind, then you're engaging in spiritual materialism. And that will block your way. You might as well have not got started in personal evolvement at all. And just left everything up to cause and effect. Take your chances. Roll the dice. Take your chances. Than to get caught up in personal evolvement, learning how it works, applying the rules, and letting it boost up rather than help tear down your false ego. Because further crystallizing the false ego on a spiritual path only makes that so-called spiritual path, that personal evolvement toward true selfhood, all the more remote from your grasp than it had been in the first place. It's kind of akin to that kind of stuck point that surrounds or is involved with, getting beyond karma. As long as we are concerned about creating good karma, we're still involved in the karmic cycle. Being concerned about no longer being caught up in the karmic cycle, which keeps us bound to earth incarnations, is another way to keep yourself caught up in the cycle. Because you're concerned about the results of your actions. And that's the thing to get past. Of course, not understanding anything about cause and effect, and therefore having no concern over the results of your actions, isn't the way to go about it either. Might as well be psychopathic. So becoming very aware of how cause and effect works, how karma works, how it all fits together is very important. And then getting beyond it. Learning how to, slow down or cease creating negative karma. That's part of it. And then, learning how to manipulate karma. We've learned about that in my narration of the book called Karma. All right? But ultimately, getting past all karmic concerns whatsoever is one of the major steps in, getting past karma. Period. Totally. And that's not through ignorance of it. That's coming out the other end from ignorance of it. Through knowledge of it, learning to work with it, learning to use it, learning to how to work it, and finally having no concern over it at all. Having no concern over the result of your actions. This, of course, does not mean acting immorally. I'm trying to make a point here. It's a very similar thing to getting away from what we might call spiritual materialism. How the heck do you do that when everything that you do to personally evolve? I'm not talking about being on a spiritual path here in my channel. You should know that by now. All right? But the book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, helps to make the point that I'm making here. We can call this a spiritual journey. We can call it whatever we want. Personal evolvement. Overcoming the, getting above the major influences of the world and consciousness, whatever. Movement toward true selfhood. All right. Personal evolution and achievement training. That's what I call it. All right. If any of that, any such work along these lines serves to pump out your chest, make you feel better than somebody else, make you feel like, oh, I'm really getting somewhere now, then put on the brakes, back up, folks. Because you're bringing your ego along with you. If you've been truly doing the work that I have posted here, that ego should be crumbling, decrystallizing, not crystallizing. Right now, I am creating, and I'm going to post this video at this point as a checkpoint for you. I want you to take a close look, an honest look at yourself. Kind of maybe ask yourself these questions. Have I been doing all the work as given in this playlist? Or have I been jumping around, only taking what I think I need, kind of like letting my little ego guide me through this, only doing the things that I want to do? Well, what part of you is it that wants to do certain parts and not others? If you've been just kind of jumping around, doing a little of this and a little bit of that, and thinking you're getting somewhere, and that you don't need all of it, I want you to ask yourself, what part of you, or what you take to be you, is giving you this instruction? To just do a little of this and a little of that, and feel like you're getting somewhere. What part of you is telling you this stuff? Your ego? I'll bet it is. If you've been using my channel, this playlist, the material here to just build up a little mental library of information, but not really been doing anything with it? Why are you doing that? Why? Is it making you feel smarter? What part of you, what structure within you is it that feels smarter? Your ego? I am not a New Ager. And as that other video I was talking about implies, a lot of New Age thought, a lot of New Age talk, even if some of the content is good, useful information, a lot of the ways it's presented, especially this law of attraction stuff, how to get what you want, how to have your desires fulfilled, how to attract into your life the things that you desire. This stuff appeals to the ego. Yes, there is a law of attraction. We know about that if you've been following through here with all of my material. You know what it really is. And you should also by now know that if you use any of this material to satisfy your false ego's desires, or any desires that have any kind of an unethical nature to them, as I have defined it here, or anything that's going to keep you tied to the lower planes, it is not part of your personal involvement. It is simply further crystallizing your false ego structure. If you have misunderstood anything that I have posted here in the manners that I am describing here, then please go back to the beginning and start over, or discontinue everything that you have been engaged in here with my playlist completely. Because I said in the beginning, this is not for people who desire to use any of my material in any negative fashion whatsoever. This is for your personal involvement and your achievement in the short and long-term pictures of your existence. You cannot move toward true selfhood and keep your false ego intact along the way. The two ideas are antithetical to one another. I'm serious. Do you want to know why? One of the main reasons why information about who we really are, occult laws, the true nature of the human being, the true self. Do you want to know why information like that, the facts of the case and the how-tos, have been kept from the masses for so long? It might seem like there's been a lot of deception and so forth in keeping this kind of information from the majority of people. And in some cases, that's exactly what it is, in order to control people. Yes. But there's another reason for it. And that is because as long as people are going to keep their false egos intact and use any of this kind of information, whether they mean to or not, but ultimately just to further crystallize their false ego structure, That's dangerous for them. Don't tell them this stuff. Because if they misuse it, not necessarily against other people, use it against other people, but just against their own personal involvement, thinking that they're personally evolving all the while, it's dangerous for them. It's not healthy. This is one of the reasons why such information has traditionally been given only in steps, small little steps, to select disciples, ones who were ready. Well, now this kind of information is much more available to the masses, and that means much of the masses are going to be using it unwisely. Don't you be one of those people. I'm not laying this material out here for you if you are going to use it unwisely. Take a good look at yourself right now. This is a checkpoint in this playlist. Have you been engaging in what Chogyam Trungpa calls spiritual materialism or not? Do you feel personally empowered more now than you did before you started looking at my playlists? Well, if you do feel more personally empowered, I want you to ask yourself, what part of you feels that? Do you feel some kind of personal empowerment? Does your personality feel stronger? Do you feel more confident as a force in the world? You personally? If you do, I want you to ask yourself, which side of the fine line about this material are you standing on? Do you feel universal will flowing through you? The infinite power of universal will flowing through you, its instrument of expression? Or do you, as an individual separate entity, feel more powerful than you did before? If it's that latter, you've been going the wrong direction. At least not the direction I've asked you to go in, or that I have suggested you go in, or that I have implied that you go in, or that I have intended to help you go in. Checkpoint. That's what this video is. It's a checkpoint. I wouldn't be doing my job here if I didn't provide this checkpoint at this point. I gotta tell you one more thing. That false ego is a very tricky thing. It does everything it possibly can to maintain itself. It will come up with every trick in the book. It will even come up with things like, see, I no longer am here. I am dissolved. See how far you've gotten now? See how far we've gone? See how personally evolved we are? We have no more false ego. And that can be your false ego at work. like I have said elsewhere in this channel, don't get distracted. Don't get caught up in any feelings of grandiosity over any of this material, any feelings of going forward, getting beyond somebody else, knowing more than the next person. No feelings of grandiosity over it. No, I did this, I accomplished that. None of that. None of it. If any of that has been happening, knock it off. Get over it. If any of that is happening, you have fallen further than you know. We want to talk about entities and their deceptiveness. Thought forms, whatever kinds, that have an influence on you in a negative fashion, in a fashion that keeps you tied to lower vibrations, well, then be careful of those that support the crystallization of your false ego. It is not an essential component of what you really are. It is a non-essential component. It is an assumed or alleged survival mechanism in this world. It's not necessary at all. It's kind of like the intellect, you know? The intellect likes to convince itself that it can solve all problems. And when it can't solve a problem, it tells you that the problem doesn't exist or that there is no answer to it whatsoever. Because if the intellect were to admit that it can't solve everything, that it has limits, then that would be like, it would be hurting itself. Well, the false ego is kind of the same way. It likes to continue its own survival like it's some separate thing. And that's exactly what it gets you to believe, that you are it, and that you are a separate entity from the whole. Yes, you are a distinct line of experience in the whole. You are a center, a focal point of universal will. Yes. But are you some separate existence? Some separate ego? No. That's not you. That's a false structure. And that's the one that'll get you in trouble every time you fall for it. There are individuals who have managed to become very successful with deep meditation. And methods of meditation, I would suggest, that aren't so safe. Because what they've ended up doing is experiencing what they thought was their own annihilation. You know, some of these forms of meditation where you could blank out your mind, just completely blank. Well, there are certain people who have studied Buddhism, let's say, and practiced certain forms of meditation, and they have thought that they were, you know, experiencing their own annihilation, let's say, through total blankness, and then, you know, with the ideology that goes with this. And you know what? Their false ego structure never became dismantled along the way. It went with them. And you know what would happen? You know what happened to at least one such person in history? When their false ego was right there experiencing what they thought was their own self-annihilation, and yet right there the ego is experiencing it. You know what resulted? Psychosis. I might be wrong about this. Not about what I just said, no, but about this following. You want to know who that one person was? I said this has happened. Did this happen to at least one person? Now, I'm going to speculate a little bit here. And I'll tell you why I don't think it's very far out of line, my speculation. That one person was Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher. I took a course. I'm not a specialist in Nietzsche, okay? But I know a little bit more about him than most people who throw his name around at parties. I did take a course at UC Berkeley in Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. Now, the professor who taught the course was very passionate about Nietzsche. Gave very good lectures. Wonderful person. He was a great person. We sometimes gave him standing ovations at the ends of his lectures. He was a very passionate speaker. He was very good. Very good. And I had a graduate student instructor running my study section and grading all my papers and exams. He was getting his PhD from UC Berkeley. His specialty was Nietzsche. And he had also been doing a lot of work at Columbia University in Friedrich Nietzsche as well. Now, I once wrote a paper after reading a lot of Nietzsche's works, and especially some of the little snippets of information that are in the book called Will to Power, which Nietzsche himself did not write. He wrote the material in it, but he did not compile it into the book. As I understand it, as I recall, both my professor and the graduate student instructors and so forth who were in charge of grading all my papers and instructing me, it was Friedrich Nietzsche's sister who compiled that book. She just grabbed together a bunch of little notes, some written on laundry receipts and so forth. Just little, paragraphs, sentences, phrases that Friedrich himself had written. And she compiled them, put them together in a book, a huge, thick book called Will to Power. And the sequence that she put them in, the way she arranged it all, made it look like Nietzsche himself had written all of this, and that it was all, some kind of sequential development of thought, when actually it wasn't. It wasn't stuff he published at all. All right? But near the end, somewhere near the end, he talks about having meditated and experienced his own self-annihilation, and then not being able to whisper a word or something about, I can only whisper this. And then that's right around the time when it's also known, as I recall, that Friedrich Nietzsche spent the last several years of his life huddled into a corner in his house, unable to speak. He had, from what I could tell, become completely psychotic. I'm not sure what the what the actual diagnosis would be, but I have, put together this idea of mine that he did go psychotic at the end, because I've read elsewhere that if you go into certain deep forms of meditation, certain specific, especially Buddhist forms of meditation, with some wrong ideas about affairs, and you do not go about it correctly, or not with the proper guidance. In other words, you take your false ego deep in with you, you can experience, it can result in psychosis. Well, the way some of his notes that his sister put together in Will to Power, the indications were that this is what happened to him. And, excuse me, there was the story around the same time that while he was talking about the Overman and all of life being a matter of units of will encroaching on other units of will, and like the stronger, it's as though he was saying the person with the biggest ego, the most, I'm going to use my own words here, the most psychopathic, conscienceless person, who can step all over everybody else, the one who can do that the most with the biggest, strongest, crushing willpower, who can crush everybody else is the real person, the real man, the leader, the alpha dog. All right? And that's what life is all about. Right while he was teaching all this, this whole idea of having no compassion for anybody else, for any other thing, just all me. He witnessed somebody whipping a horse out in front of his house, because the horse couldn't move anymore. It had been overused. It had been abused. It was at the end of its rope. It could not walk anymore. And its owner was whipping it. And it fell down and I guess died. And Friedrich Nietzsche witnessed this. He witnessed taking place in front of his eyes the very thing, the very kind of thing that he had been preaching for us all to do. And he couldn't handle it. And he went insane. This is right around the time he supposedly also, went into this deep meditation and experienced his own annihilation. Of course, what was it that experienced its own annihilation? Well, his ego. And you see, you can't have an ego that witnesses and outlives and survives this thing that it considers to be its own annihilation all at the same time. This confusion. I don't know how else to put it, but I wrote a paper about it. I was very clear about how I stated all of this in my paper at UC Berkeley, expecting that if I screwed up any part of that paper, well, knowing full well that if I made any mistakes in my understanding of the works of Nietzsche, or in my understanding of the states of mind involved with respect to what he was talking about, or his actual life, misunderstanding or getting any parts of this wrong, I would not pass, the paper would not pass. I mean, you see Berkeley and Harvard, Princeton, these kind of places are not places where you can just bullshit in a philosophy paper and get away with it. Well, I got an A on the paper. So what I'm relating to you here about that, to the best of my memory, if I'm relating it correctly, is accurate. And I'm stating him as an example of spiritual materialism, what Chogyam Trungpa is calling spiritual materialism taken to an extreme. So, this video right here is a checkpoint for you. If you are seriously on the road to true selfhood, then you are seriously on the road to or away from false selfhood. You can't have both. You can't have both. You can't have both. So, let me ask you a question. In the movement toward true selfhood, in self-actualization, in self-realization, the real thing, is there a sacrifice? Is there a sacrifice? Must a sacrifice be made? What is the answer? What's the answer? The answer is yes. There is a sacrifice. Of course, there are many little ones along the way, but I'm talking about in the big picture, the sacrifice. What is it? It's the false ego.